Hello and welcome to today's political linguist discussion. Some of the issues that have been happening at the moment concerning politics and language and their interface are that the Florida Department of Education has introduced a new curriculum and it's caused controversy in a number of ways. And I'd just like to talk about it briefly because it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to tell a story. So my welcome to this channel speech, very briefly, is that I oppose fascism. I'm a mom against fascism, Antifa mom. And fascism to me is a strategy for exploiting people's interests in safeguarding against loss, perceived loss. The perceived is very important because you can stoke people's fears or their perceptions that they might lose something by telling them your children are going to lose their self-confidence if you teach them about slavery being bad. So instead, we're going to do a silver linings of slavery approach down in here old Florida. We're going to teach the upside of slavery. Some enslaved people may have. Did they? Did they just learn skills whilst being oppressed and sort of, potentially create a net positive for the hundreds of years during which slavery flourished in the United States, flourished and was very profitable at both a personal level for some people, white people benefiting from that race-based subjugation and exploitation of another group of people. Slavery. Why would anyone want to not just unequivocally condemn slavery as a moral ill and try to help with the process, the ongoing process of culturally detaching ourselves from that process of rationalizing and accommodating, as well as benefiting from the visible and invisible systems of oppression. And by oppression, I don't just mean using people as chattel slavery and separating family members and raping and torturing and harming people. I mean the systems of ensuring people were dominated and kept in their place and deterred from even undertaking practices such as learning to read or learning to write, because enslaved people, it's been historically recorded that some had fingers taken off at a knuckle for the audacity of wanting to learn to read, and that this was done to emotionally terrorize the enslaved population in America, to deter them from further efforts to learn to read or write, or to be caught even secretly learning to read or write, because it was believed with a good foundation that being able to read and write would assist in the formation of potential rebellions against the practice of slavery, i.e. enslaved people who could read, enslaved people who could write were more likely to have power to pass notes to each other, to expose and describe their own stories, and to enhance their ability to organize and to make a movement to throw off the shackles of enslavement. Well, let's see if we've got a comment. We've got someone called Christopher. Hello, my friend Christopher. Welcome to today's show. Up on the screen, I think, I don't have it yet. Nope. I'm going to find a post by Professor Darren Hutchinson, who spends his life doing this important work of researching court cases during the period of enslavement. So this is his work at the moment. And he's just published an article in a law journal discussing a Florida Supreme Court ruling from that time period, ruling that Black people, whether enslaved or not, needed to be, and this is a quote, continually reminded of their inferior position. And this shows how the very system of perpetuating slavery was necessary to preserve the system of of racial domination, benefiting white people at the expense of black people. And I'm just going to read a detail of the case. The Florida Supreme Court was considering whether a slave named Luke could face charges of criminal mischief for killing the wandering mules of a neighboring plantation owner at the request of his master. The court held that because Luke was merely the property of his owner, he could not face criminal liability. In the absence of legislation to the contrary, slaves were found by the court to lack free will to commit crimes. I mean, obviously just convenient in that case, because I'm sure at other times slaves were found criminally liable and punished, or rather their punishment was always extrajudicial. Owners could punish their property at their perception, at their will. They didn't have to submit to the due process and the rigors of a formalized legal system. So the court also found, this is the key to the argument though that I'm making today, courtesy of Professor Darren Hutchinson, that the court also found that maintaining legal distinctions between blacks, whether they were enslaved or not, was necessary to preserve whites' racial domination. So do you feel what the court's saying? The court is saying even freed slaves need to be reminded of their place. We need to have built-in reminders at every level of society to remind them that white people are superior, that white people have potentially religiously ordained rights to own, to subjugate, to be held as superior, to be viewed in the eyes of the law as special, that this was important. And a quote from the legal ruling is, "The perpetuation of slavery, indeed the common safety of the citizens during its continuance, would seem to require that the superiority of the white or Caucasian race over the African Negro should be ever demonstrated and preserved so far as the dictates of humanity will allow. The degraded caste should be continually reminded of their inferior position to keep them in a proper degree of subjection to the authority of the free white citizens." And a word I'm going to circle back to is safety, a phrase, indeed, to ensure the common safety of the citizens during its continuance. Do we know any people now who might overstep the dictates of humanity even, who might seem to go out of their way to ensure that people remember who's the boss, who's in charge, and who can be pulled out of their car and handcuffed without cause, whose necks can be knelt on without due cause, who is the self-appointed, which type of people are often the self-appointed keepers of this enduring societal problem in the United States, of a problem that many white people don't see as a problem. Many white people are on record as answering to pollsters that they think America has evolved into a post-race society. And those white people are perpetuating harm through their maintained willful ignorance of this problem, which is that there's a lot of white people, including police officers, white police officers, but even people of color in the armed force, who are law enforcement officers, who have taken on this shared goal for themselves to enforce and preserve and demonstrate that some people are inherently worthy of degradation and some people are inherently worthy of protection and due process and constitutional protections. An invisible system maintained by people's expectations, people's convictions, people's inner systems of organizing the world and perceiving the world, and then acting at the behest of a conscience formed and shaped by those convictions. So those racist convictions existed, and the media and our individuals, all of us can do so much more to upend, to turn around the enduring nature of some of that legacy of harm, of a system acknowledged by the court, of reminding people of an inferior position to keep them in a proper degree of subjection to the authority of the deserving and who is seen as less deserving. It's enacted on in small and large ways all over this nation and indeed all over the world, wherever people have adopted that form of hierarchy in which whiteness is equated with virtue, assumption of virtue, assumption of innocence, assumption of good intent. And that's all my broadcast for today. I refer you to this Twitter account, if I can make it, if I can make it more, if I can make it larger. And then I got to go. Professor Darren Hutchinson, his account on this bird app is at Dissenting J. And I've just noticed he follows me and I'm so honored. How many people does he follow? He follows a few people. I'm still extremely honored. So he's in the Emory University School of Law, the John Lewis Chair in Civil Rights and Social Justice, a Google Scholar also. And also I recommend to you looking up accounts that have unpacked the Florida curriculum more, even a publication on the grio.com. Michael Harriot wrote a piece about examining more broadly what's wrong with the Florida curriculum and how it departs from a more accurate version of history to a specific distorted version that celebrates conservative scholars by falsely framing them as being civil rights activists when they weren't. They just want to push their Black co-conspirators on the public and on school students, middle school students, more because those people have essentially agreed to co-sign off on a lot of white supremacist narrative, and the white supremacist narrative of convenience, which is minimize the harms of slavery, minimize the immorality and the evils of slavery, and by focusing on silver linings or the achievements of people who overcame obstacles. And it's very deceitful because it sounds almost difficult to argue with. Oh, you want to celebrate the achievements of Black people? Not really. A lot of the people described in the curriculum, actually, some of them were not slaves. Some of them had skills before slavery. Some of them acquired those skills despite in the teeth of being enslaved, secretly acquired skills, or skills acquired after they were able to win or purchase their own freedom. In the teeth of slavery, not as a cheerful byproduct of slavery, in spite of this degrading, awful process lasting decades, oppressing people across generations, and for the benefit of white people, for the benefit, even societally, people benefited from cheap labor. The cheap labor of unpaid, exploited, dehumanized, enslaved Black Americans who had been stolen from their own productive lives on the coast of Africa, the coast of African countries where they were agrarian laborers, farmers, skilled technicians who were forced to give up their skill set to teach white people better farming practices and who introduced crops such as golden rice, who introduced new strategies for irrigation, who helped incompetent white people achieve wealth that they did not deserve. That was a product of this practice of they didn't deserve it for their agrarian skills. They accrued it through their skills at enslaving and torturing others. It's wealth that was morally derived, and people who want to whitewash history and who want to whitewash the basis of that wealth that didn't just apply to agricultural industries, it made other industries cheaper and more competitive on a world market as well. American cloths were cheaper because of the cotton being cheaper, because of the people who owned their workers rather than paid their workers. Well, that's a better way. I don't have to keep saying slaves all the time. If I say workers who were exploited and owned and treated badly, obviously. I just don't want to say slaves all the time because I feel like it is heavy. It's heavy. It's sad, but at the same time I don't want to fall into the the bad practice that fascists such as Governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, have employed of willfully, purposefully trying to minimize the harms of slavery by foregrounding and misrepresenting the lives of various notable and famous free people who, once they were no longer slaves, were able to lean into their own professional lives once they had their own individual freedoms rightly restored to them. Thank you, Christopher. I'm glad you enjoyed the broadcast. I hope anyone else out there who's enjoyed talking with me will consider calling in and making an appearance on this show. I miss having guests, even though I also enjoy sharing what I've learned in my travels. Oh, bye.